Welcome to another session of Weir Wednesdays, when we take a deeper look into one of the artworks in the Weir collection at RiverBrink. My name is Deborah Antonczyk, and I'm the Director-Curator at RiverBrink. With all of the warm weather that we've been having lately, I thought it would be a good time to take a look at this watercolor titled Incoming Waves by Sir William Russell Flint. A lovely depiction of a day at the seaside. This deceptively simple watercolor of an unknown coastal beach conveys not only the look, but also the feel of the seashore on holiday. The beach seems to stretch endlessly, and sand and water and sky flow together. The scene includes 3 young women in the surf, 2 nude and 1 in a bathing suit. They appear playfully frolicking in the waves. The watercolor shows 2 important characteristics associated with Flint: an apparent effortless skill in the medium and a preoccupation with erotic nudes as a subject. The watercolor was acquired by Sam Weir in 1973 from Sotheby's Auction House in London. It's one of 3 watercolors by Flint in the collection, but there's no indication as to why Sam Weir was interested in this particular artist, except that he had recently died. Sir William Russell Flint was born in Edinburgh in 1880 and died in London in 1969. On the 50th anniversary of his death, art historian Timothy Wilcox, writing in Apollo magazine, described Flint as the most accomplished watercolor artist of his day. And this is quite extraordinary praise for an artist working in the 1920s, at the high point of British watercolor painting, when watercolor was celebrated as a quintessentially British medium. Building on the legacy of Turner and other 19th century painters, even modernists such as Paul Nash were painting in watercolor following World War I. In a review of an exhibition of watercolors at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1922, the American Museum of Art gushed, quote, "In the English representation, nearly every artist is of international fame. England is the native land of watercolor painting, and the art still flourishes more vigorously there than in any other country," end quote. William Russell Flint studied at the Royal Institution School of Art, Edinburgh, and Hatherley School of Fine Art in Chelsea before beginning a career as a designer and a lithographer. And here we're looking at one of his illustrations for the publication of Morte Arthur by Thomas Sheridan. Hatherley's was well known for an open and free approach to art instruction. It attracted a number of pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood painters, artists such as Edward Burne-Jones and Dante Gabriele Rossetti studied there. It was also strong in illustration, an important interest and focus early in Flint's career. He worked as a visual reporter, recording current events for the Illustrated London News, where he developed skill in quickly rendering a scene. He then worked as an illustrator for a number of classic texts, including this one by Thomas Sheridan and others such as the Canterbury Tales and the poems of Robbie Burns, to name a few. We can see the influence of the pre-Raphaelite painters on these illustrations, really illuminations in the terminology of illuminated manuscripts for their incredibly rich detail, quite extraordinary detail. Flint also studied independently at the British Museum, copying in the collection. A gifted and highly prolific watercolor painter, Flint was a Royal Academician, a member of the Royal Society of Painter, Etchers, and Engravers, a silver medal winner at the 1930 Paris Salon, and for 20 years he served as president of the Royal Society of Painters in Watercolor. He won prizes at international watercolor exhibitions. He was the subject of numerous books and articles, and he quickly entered national public collections both in London and overseas. So his work was popular with the public, less so with art critics, who found his work facile and trite. One of the other factors in the artist's reputation was his early interest, early adoption, as we say today, of reproductions of his watercolors. For an artist who began his career in commercial art, in newspaper and book illustration, the move to reproductions was perhaps a natural one. Flint's first signed limited edition print, Lydia, was published in 1924. And we can see it here in this illustration. Prior to his death, more than 100 limited edition series were published, an industry that continues today. Reproductions are still available for purchase through the artist's estate. In the 1950s and 60s, these high-quality reproductions of Flint's watercolors saturated the suburban United Kingdom. We might call them the Trish romance of post-war Britain. The result was a kind of invisibility for both the artist and the paintings. Their ubiquitousness meant that people stopped looking, but owning and displaying the reproductions was a sign of middle-class identity. A closer look at the early paintings, however, reveal an artist who traveled with a keen eye, who explored local customs and scenery across Europe. Flint captured landscapes, but also local festivals, such as Ascension Day in Catalonia and Spanish dancers in full costume. He witnessed and recorded widespread poverty in rural communities that had remained almost unchanged for centuries. He recorded scenes of Romany and other marginalized people in watercolor. In this highly detailed scene, the billiard bar, Flint captures both a time and a place. There is a suggestion of a narrative, but exactly what that might be is unclear. The artist is also part of the scene because we have his tools, his drawing board and paints in the lower left-hand corner, but he's not physically represented in the scene. So there's a distance. And in another example, here the artist shows a bathhouse changing room. It is a feminine space, which hints at a harem. The women are in various states of undress. Nonetheless, all of them are wearing a scarf or a head covering, and the implied male viewer is allowed to enter a secluded space through this painting. The erotic nudes, for which Flint is well known, presume a male audience and play to the male gaze. The sense of the artist as voyeur becomes more pronounced in subsequent work, the details of location in custom and dress becoming merely an occasion to depict the female nude in exotic dress and semi-erotic pose. The Spanish dancer stripped to the waist, the Romany woman bathing in the nude. Although the library at RiverBrink does not include any of the illustrated classic texts by Flint, there is one book, Models of Propriety, written and illustrated by Flint in the collection. Flint dedicated the book to, quote, all virtuous young ladies who pose unadorned for honest artists. And in this case, unadorned means in the nude. The book contains some fairly explicit nudes of the pinup type circa 1950s, along with attempts at humor. Among the models, Flint names are the Honorable Miss Jane Plush and Miss Prudence All Alone. The drawings are accompanied by descriptions of interruptions in the studio, with male visitors arriving unannounced to a session of live nude modeling and other titillating encounters. So not a great work of literature, in other words, by this, by all accounts, happily married Scottish Presbyterian who was at this point well into his 70s and knighted in 1947 to become Sir William Russell Flint. Leaving aside the more contentious aspects of the artist's oeuvre, we're left with his facility with the medium. He had a light, sure touch, producing a harmonious color mix of sand and purple and aquamarine, and employing variety in texture and brushstroke, often wet on wet. The watercolor shows his absolute control of shading and gradation using a limited palette. Contrasting the light palette in the sea and shore are the dark brown streaks in the upper left, which draw the eye to the background, curving around to the right. This creates the impression of a sheltered cove, isolating the figures who are on display, too preoccupied to notice the viewer. The foaming sea and waves recall images of water nymphs and other mythological figures. Flint spent many holidays with his family at St. Malo in Brittany, and this may well be the physical setting for this scene, known for its fine sandy beaches. But the scene does not evoke the chill of the North Atlantic. Instead, it's an imaginary scene, a fantasy of a day at the beach, and something I hope we can all look forward to in the near future. Thank you.